From the outside, my life with John looked like something straight out of a magazine, honestly. He was just so incredibly successful, so admired by everyone, and there I was, Clara, living in what felt like this perfect, sun-drenched bubble. We had the beautiful house, the seemingly effortless charm as a couple. It was the kind of marriage most women probably dreamt of. I often felt a quiet pride in the life we'd built, a sort of peaceful contentment that I'd found my person, my true partner in this grand adventure. Every dinner party, every shared glance, it all just cemented this picture of marital bliss. And me? I truly believed it, or at least I wanted to. I basked in the glow of his achievements, feeling secure and cherished, a vital part of this amazing duo. We were John and Clara, and that meant something solid and unbreakable. There were moments, fleeting ones, when a tiny sliver of unease would prick at the edges of my awareness, but I'd quickly push it away, attributing it to my own anxieties or just a busy day. It was easy to dismiss those little whispers when the grand narrative of our perfect life was so compelling and so widely accepted by everyone around us. My mother, bless her heart, always seemed to be right there, a constant presence, particularly when it came to my relationships and my overall well-being. She'd offer advice, gently guide me, always with my best interests at heart, or so I believed. It felt like her love was so strong, so protective, almost overwhelmingly so at times, especially when it came to John. Her involvement wasn't overbearing in an obvious way, more like a subtle current beneath the surface of our lives, always pulling me towards what she deemed right for me, always reinforcing John's stature and suitability. Looking back, there were these tiny moments, almost imperceptible at the time, that started to gnaw at me. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a subtle shift in the air, a fleeting expression on John's face, or a peculiar silence. Sometimes, he'd have these unexplained absences, brief disappearances that he'd wave off with a vague explanation about a client or a late meeting. I'd try to shake off the feeling, tell myself I was being paranoid, that all couples had their routines and their alone time, but a tiny, insistent voice in my head just wouldn't quiet down. Then there were my mother's comments. They were always cloaked in concern, like when she'd say something like, "Isn't it wonderful how John always puts in such long hours for your future, dear?" Or, "You're so lucky to have a man who provides so well, Clara." They sounded supportive, meant to reassure me, but sometimes they felt a little too insistent, a tad too defensive, even when I hadn't voiced any doubts. It was as if she was trying to convince me of something, or perhaps convince herself, subtly pushing me to appreciate what I had, to not look too closely. I remember once, John was particularly late, and I felt a pang of worry, a real unease that wasn't just about his safety. When I mentioned it to my mother, her immediate response was to pivot, to talk about how much he valued me and our life together, how busy he must be with such important work. It wasn't a direct answer to my concern, but a reassurance of his character, almost a deflection. These little instances, piling up, began to create a vague sense of disquiet within me, a feeling that something wasn't quite adding up in my perfectly curated world. That tiny whisper, that nagging doubt, it was about to morph into a full-blown scream. I remember the evening vividly. It was just a regular Tuesday, I think. John was supposedly working late, as usual, and I was just puttering around the house, trying to organize some papers in his study. My mother had been over earlier that day, and I remember her fussing a bit around his desk, tidying up, which she often did. A slight annoyance, maybe, but nothing out of the ordinary. The house felt quiet, almost too quiet, amplifying every rustle of paper, every creak of the floorboards as I moved. Then, there it was, not tucked away, not hidden meticulously, but almost carelessly left behind, as if the universe itself wanted me to see it. It wasn't some grand, dramatic revelation, no scandalous love letters tied with ribbon. It was far more insidious, a text message notification on an old, forgotten tablet that John rarely used, tucked beneath a pile of business journals. Just a name, a time, and a few words that made my stomach drop into my shoes. My breath hitched in my throat, a cold, sickening wave washing over me. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was enough. More than enough. A simple string of words, casual, intimate, undeniable. I felt the blood drain from my face, a profound chill seeping into my bones that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. My mother's earlier tidying suddenly made a twisted kind of sense. She must have tried to bury it, to hide this ugly truth from me, but she hadn't quite succeeded. This wasn't a hint or a curious comment or a vague absence anymore. This was the first, undeniable, agonizing crack in the picture-perfect facade of my life, a wound that went far deeper than I could have ever imagined. The morning after finding that message, the world felt different. It wasn't just the shock, it was this icy dread that had settled deep in my stomach. When John walked in, acting as if nothing had changed, flashing that familiar, easy smile, I felt a surge of nausea. Holding the tablet, my hand trembling slightly, I confronted him. His initial reaction was a whirlwind of practiced denials, a series of dismissive gestures, and a calm, infuriating attempt to make me feel like I was overreacting, misunderstanding a harmless work conversation. He even tried to turn it around, accusing me of snooping, of not trusting him. But the evidence, those few simple words, wouldn't let me be swayed. The pit in my stomach churned, a constant reminder that this wasn't just a misinterpretation. His attempts to minimize it, to explain it away with a furrowed brow and a feigned look of disappointment in my lack of trust, only fueled the growing fire within me. Every word he spoke, every reassuring touch, felt like a lie. Suddenly, everything I thought I knew about him, about us, felt like it was slipping through my fingers, dissolving into a painful, hazy uncertainty. As the days bled into each other, a profound sense of questioning began to consume me. It wasn't just John anymore. I started to question everything. My own memories, my perceptions, even the small, seemingly insignificant details of our life together. Was that knowing look he'd shared with someone at a party truly innocent? Had that late-night phone call been about business, or something far more personal? The comfortable narratives I'd built my life upon were unraveling, thread by painful thread, leaving me adrift in a sea of suspicion and self-doubt. It wasn't long before my attention started to pivot from John's betrayal to something even more disquieting: my mother's reactions. Her immediate dismissal of John's actions, even when faced with my very real distress, was jarring. It was as if she had a script, one that painted John as an innocent victim of my overactive imagination, or a man simply under too much pressure. Her voice would take on this overly soothing, almost patronizing tone, always quick to defend him, as if my pain was just an inconvenience to her perfect narrative of my life. She'd subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, remind me of John's value, reiterating how lucky I was to have him, almost as a reflex. "Clara, dear, you know how hard John works. Men get tempted," she'd say, brushing away my tears with a hand that felt oddly detached. It was a constant barrage of veiled warnings about what I stood to lose, rather than any genuine empathy for the heartbreak I was clearly experiencing. It felt like she was more concerned with maintaining appearances, with preserving the image of my ideal marriage, than with my actual well-being. Then, memories started to flood back, a painful reel of past instances where my mother had downplayed John's flaws. Small arguments we'd had, times he'd been dismissive or neglectful, always met with her intervention, gently steering me back towards him. "He means well, Clara," she'd often say, or, "You have to be understanding. He's a man of his stature." Each recollection chipped away at the trust I had in her, painting a clearer, more disturbing picture of her long-standing, unwavering loyalty to John, a loyalty that now seemed to supersede even her own daughter's happiness. The pieces of this horrifying puzzle were slowly, painfully, clicking into place. It wasn't just my mother's dismissiveness anymore. It was the way her eyes would dart away when I pressed her, the way her voice would tighten when I mentioned specific details about John's supposed work trips. The more I looked, the more I saw, and it felt like the very foundation of my childhood, of my relationship with her, was crumbling beneath my feet. I started to feel this chilling sense of being manipulated, of having my reality shaped by her for years. Then came the moment that shattered whatever fragile trust I had left. It wasn't a direct confession from her, not yet, but a damning confirmation from someone else. It was my Aunt Sarah, a woman who had always been a quiet observer, a confidant in hushed tones. Over a cup of tea, with a look of profound sorrow in her eyes, Aunt Sarah gently revealed something that confirmed my darkest fears. She mentioned a conversation she'd overheard, a plea from my mother to John to be more careful, to keep up appearances for Clara's sake, many months ago. The words hung in the air like poison. Hearing it from a third party, removed from the immediate emotional whirlwind, somehow made it even more real, more devastating. It wasn't just a strong indication anymore. It was an undeniable admission, a gut punch that left me breathless. My mother, the woman who had always been my protector, my guiding light, was not just aware of John's infidelity but had actively participated in covering it up. The sheer weight of that betrayal, a double betrayal, landed on me with crushing force, leaving me reeling and utterly alone in a world I no longer recognized. The confrontation with my mother wasn't just difficult, it was raw, devastating, like tearing open an old wound that I didn't even realize was festering. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words and years of unspoken truths, a palpable tension that made it hard to breathe. I remember her face, etched with a mixture of guilt, defiance, and a deep, profound sadness. My voice, usually steady, trembled as I demanded to know why, how she could have done this to me, her own daughter. The feeling of betrayal was a physical ache in my chest, a cold knot tightening with every second of her silence. She finally confessed, her voice barely a whisper at first, then gaining a desperate urgency as the words tumbled out. She explained her reasoning, a tangled mess of what she truly believed were selfless intentions. It was all rooted, she claimed, in a deep-seated fear that I wouldn't find anyone as successful or secure as John again. A fear, she admitted, that had haunted her since her own youth, since her own struggles after my father's business troubles. She revealed insecurities I never knew she harbored, a desperate need for my life to be perfect and safe, something she felt she never truly achieved herself. Hearing her story, a flood of conflicting emotions washed over me. Anger, certainly, but also a crushing wave of confusion and a profound disappointment that cut deeper than any knife. This wasn't just John's betrayal anymore. This was my mother, the woman I had always trusted implicitly, revealing a hidden agenda, a secret pact that had orchestrated a significant part of my adult life. The tears streamed down my face, not just for the loss of my marriage, but for the shattering of my foundational belief in my mother's unconditional support, realizing I had been living a lie, carefully constructed by the very person meant to protect me. The anger surged through me like a wildfire, hot and consuming, fueled by the sheer injustice of it all. It wasn't just about John's infidelity anymore. That felt almost secondary to the gut-wrenching realization that my own mother had been a silent, complicit partner in my deception. How could she, the one person who was supposed to always have my back, actively participate in building a life for me that was founded on such a devastating lie? Every "I love you," every "I just want you to be happy," now felt tainted, a cruel twist of manipulation rather than genuine affection. The confusion was almost as debilitating as the anger. My entire perception of my upbringing, of our family dynamics, suddenly twisted into something unrecognizable. Had her guidance always been laced with this kind of hidden agenda? Was her overwhelming presence in my life less about support and more about control, about shaping me into the daughter who would secure the perfect life she envisioned? It was as if a veil had been ripped away, revealing a shadow play behind the scenes of my own existence, orchestrated by the woman I cherished most. The profound disappointment was a heavy cloak, smothering any remaining flicker of my old self. It settled in my chest, a constant, aching weight. I saw my mother now, not just as the loving parent, but as a strategist, a fear-driven individual who prioritized perceived security over her daughter's authentic happiness. This new painful light cast a harsh glare on our entire relationship, making me question every piece of advice, every reassuring word, every seemingly innocent gesture she had ever offered. It was a complete reevaluation of my past, and it hurt more than any simple betrayal of a spouse ever could. The weight of her confession, of her reasons, felt like a physical burden pressing down on me. My mother, my rock, had, in her misguided attempt to ensure my security, orchestrated a deception that had poisoned the very core of my marital happiness. It wasn't just about the infidelity anymore. It was about the profound violation of trust from the person who was supposed to be my safe harbor. The realization that her love, her concern, had been intertwined with such a deep-seated fear for my financial future, rather than just my emotional well-being, was a truly bitter pill to swallow. It was during those agonizing moments that I started to truly see her, and by extension, my entire upbringing, through a new, excruciatingly painful lens. Every time she had praised John's ambition, every time she had subtly pushed me to overlook his flaws, it all clicked into place, revealing a pattern of manipulation I had been completely blind to. The carefree innocence of my youth felt tainted, as if every step I had taken, particularly in my relationship with John, had been guided by her hidden agenda, making me a pawn in her long-held anxieties. The profound sense of loss wasn't just for the man I thought I married, but for the mother I thought I knew. This raw, exposed wound left me feeling utterly alone, adrift in a sea of shattered illusions. It was a turning point, a seismic shift in my personal landscape. The only way forward, I realized with a heavy heart, was to navigate this new, desolate terrain and somehow find my own ground, completely independent of the narratives my mother had so carefully constructed for me. The dust hadn't even begun to settle on the emotional wreckage, but I knew, with a certainty that surprised even me, that I couldn't stay in that shattered landscape. The first, most painful step was separating myself from John. It wasn't a decision I took lightly, but after the dual betrayal, there was simply no going back. Initiating divorce proceedings felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream, signing papers that represented the dismantling of everything I had painstakingly built, or rather, everything I thought I had. It was a tangible act of reclaiming my life, even as my hand trembled on the pen. Then came the even trickier part, untangling myself from my mother's pervasive influence. This wasn't a single dramatic break, but a careful, often agonizing process of setting firm boundaries. Every phone call, every visit, became a negotiation, a quiet assertion of my newfound need for space and control over my own choices. It felt like I was learning to walk again, but this time, on my own 2 feet, without her guiding hand, which had always felt like a comfort, but now felt more like a tether. It was exhausting, but absolutely vital for my sanity. In the midst of this whirlwind of legal paperwork and difficult conversations, I knew I couldn't do it alone. I tentatively reached out to a few trusted friends, women who listened with empathy and didn't judge. Their unwavering support became my lifeline, a quiet strength that reminded me I wasn't completely isolated. I even considered therapy, a thought that would have seemed foreign just months ago, but now felt like a necessary tool for navigating this uncharted emotional territory. This wasn't just about surviving, it was about truly healing. This period wasn't just about external actions, it was profoundly about an internal shift, a deep dive into self-discovery. I started to peel back the layers of who I thought I was and who I had been conditioned to be. For so long, my worth felt intrinsically tied to John's success, to the image of our perfect partnership. It was a subtle, insidious belief that had been woven into the fabric of my being, fostered perhaps by my mother's anxieties, and I was finally starting to untangle those threads. The realization that my value wasn't dictated by anyone else's achievements, or even by being in a relationship, was incredibly liberating, yet also terrifying. Learning to reclaim my autonomy meant listening to my own voice, something that had been muffled for years beneath the noise of others' expectations. I began to identify my own desires, my own needs, distinct from what John or my mother might have wanted for me. It was a slow, sometimes halting process, like learning a new language. Each small decision I made for myself, each boundary I set, felt like a tiny victory, a reaffirmation that my happiness wasn't contingent on an external source, but had to genuinely come from within, from my own choices and passions. The past betrayals, though still painful, were gradually becoming less about them and more about me. They were a catalyst, forcing me to confront long-held insecurities and to build a stronger, more resilient version of myself. I was beginning to understand that true happiness wasn't a destination found in someone else, but a journey of cultivating my own inner peace and joy. It was a challenging path, often filled with doubt and moments of overwhelming sadness, but the flicker of newfound strength within me kept me moving forward, step by courageous step. Of course, not everyone was ready to simply accept this new Clara. John, true to form, made several attempts to win me back, his efforts ranging from grand, performative gestures to whispered apologies filled with crocodile tears. Each time he'd try to rekindle that familiar flicker of doubt, reminding me of our shared past, of the perfect life we once had. It took every ounce of my newfound strength to stand firm, to see through the desperate manipulation, and to remember the crushing weight of his betrayal. Saying no to him, definitively, was one of the hardest, yet most empowering things I'd ever done. My mother, too, made her own attempts to mend our fractured relationship, but always, it seemed, on her terms. She'd revert to her old habits, subtly trying to control situations, offering unsolicited advice, or trying to downplay the severity of her actions. It was a constant dance, one where I had to hold my ground, patiently but firmly reiterating my boundaries. There were moments of profound sadness, realizing that the relationship I'd always known might never truly recover, but I understood that protecting my own peace had to be my top priority, even if it meant a different, more distant connection with her. This period was messy, undeniably so, filled with emotional landmines and difficult conversations. But each hurdle I navigated, each painful truth I embraced, solidified my resolve. I was learning to trust myself, to lean into my own instincts, and to recognize that true resilience wasn't about avoiding pain, but about moving through it, emerging stronger on the other side. This wasn't just about surviving, it was about truly living, on my own terms, laying the groundwork for a future entirely of my own making. Emerging from the sheer emotional turmoil of the past months felt like stepping out from a long, dark tunnel into brilliant sunshine. I had, against all odds, not just survived the storm, but somehow found a deeper, more resilient version of myself. The divorce from John was finally finalized, a monumental weight lifted from my shoulders, leaving me with a sense of profound relief and an open canvas for my future. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about no longer letting it define my present or dictate my direction. My relationship with my mother, while irrevocably changed, had settled into a new, more honest dynamic. It wasn't the blind adoration of my youth, nor the raw anger of discovery, but something quieter, more measured. We had established healthier boundaries, born from difficult conversations and a mutual, if sometimes strained, understanding. It was a relationship built on acceptance of our respective imperfections, a mature love that acknowledged the past, but focused on a more transparent, less controlling future, which felt like a hard-won peace. Crucially, I had made peace with my past, no longer dwelling on the betrayals I endured, but seeing them as painful catalysts for my growth. The bitterness had faded, replaced by a quiet strength and a clear vision for what I truly wanted. I was no longer defined by John's infidelity or my mother's misguided actions. Instead, I was a woman who had faced profound deception and emerged whole, a testament to my own inner fortitude and capacity for healing. With the past firmly in its place, I felt a lightness I hadn't realized was missing, a newfound freedom to truly decide what I wanted. The fear of being alone, which had been a quiet, insidious undertone for so much of my adult life, had completely dissipated. It was replaced by a powerful understanding that my own company was more than enough, that true fulfillment came from aligning my actions with my deepest desires, not from external validation or the societal pressure to always be coupled. I was charting my own course now, and it felt exhilaratingly authentic. This newfound autonomy manifested in all sorts of delightful ways. I found myself pursuing a passion I'd quietly nurtured for years, but had always pushed aside for more practical pursuits, or because it didn't align with John's perception of my role. Perhaps it was picking up painting again, or volunteering at a local animal shelter, or even taking a solo trip I'd always dreamed of. Whatever it was, these were choices made purely for me, driven by genuine curiosity and joy, rather than any external pressure or expectation. My career, too, began to thrive in ways I hadn't imagined. Without the constant need to cater to John's ego or my mother's anxieties about my financial stability, I felt a surge of creative energy and confidence. I was taking on new challenges, speaking my mind, and truly investing in my own professional growth. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was simply about stepping into my full potential, reveling in the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, entirely on my own terms. Life, for me now, is richer, quieter, and infinitely more authentic than any perfect picture I once tried to maintain. There's a profound sense of peace that comes from truly living on my own terms, where every decision, every laugh, every quiet moment of reflection is genuinely mine. I've learned that freedom isn't the absence of challenges, but the strength to face them head-on. Knowing my own worth isn't tied to anyone else's approval or presence. Perhaps I've found a new creative outlet, something I'd never dared to explore before. Or maybe I'm thriving in a modified career path that brings me genuine satisfaction. It could be something as simple as cultivating a beautiful garden, finding joy in the rhythm of nature, or perhaps forging new, deep connections with friends who truly see and appreciate me for who I am. The possibilities feel endless, precisely because they are no longer constrained by old fears or others' expectations. The ending of my story isn't about finding another partner or achieving some grand external success. It's about the quiet triumph of the human spirit. It's about resilience, about picking up the pieces and weaving them into something stronger, more beautiful, and truly reflective of who I am. This new beginning is an ongoing journey, filled with hope and the joyful realization that my most profound love story, after all this time, is with myself.